Greetings, maniacs, New Englanders, and everyone else tuning in. Well, folks, this is the end of the ballot for Maine's November referendum election. Uh, it's been a video blitz recording session getting here, but I'm glad to have done it. And I thank you if you've been tuning in for all of them. Maybe you've just tuned in for one or two that were the most important to you. But I do hope that maybe you watch them all just because they are all up for vote. And I do think that being an informed voter is very important. So, ending with question 8, we have: do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to remove a provision prohibiting a person under guardianship for reasons of mental illness from voting for governor, senators, and representatives, which the United States District Court for the District of Maine found violates the United States Constitution and federal law? Jumping right into Ballotpedia, my best friend for the last 8 videos. Main question 8: the repeal constitutional provision prohibiting voting for individuals under guardianship due to mental illness is on the ballot in Maine as a legislatively referred constitutional amendment on November 7th. A yes vote supports removing a constitutional provision found unconstitutional by a federal district court in 2001 that says individuals under a guardianship for reasons of mental illness cannot vote for governor, senators, and representatives. A no vote opposes removing a constitutional provision found unconstitutional by a federal district court in 2001 that says individuals under a guardianship for reasons of mental illness cannot vote for governor, senators, and representatives. Overview. What would this amendment do? This amendment would amend the Maine Constitution to provide for individuals under a guardianship for reasons of mental illness to be able to vote in elections for governor, senators, and representatives. This would align the Maine Constitution with the Doe v. Roe decision of the U.S. District Court, which found that Article 2, Section 1 of the Maine Constitution, along with an existing Maine statute, violates both the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. Do, ro, do, re, mi, vas, do, re, mi? Are they singing? Where's the rest of it? I'm just kidding. The Disability Rights Center of Maine filed a lawsuit in federal court in Maine on behalf of 3 individuals who were under guardianship because of mental illness in 2000. The lawsuit challenged the constitutionality of the relevant part of Article 2, Section 1, finding the language unconstitutional. Ultimately, the case failed to repeal or modify this constitutional language. Let me see. I'm just scrolling through to see if there's something more. I guess I'll just finish up with this really quickly. Had this issue appeared on Maine ballot before? The proposal to amend Article 2, Section 1 of the Maine Constitution by removing language prohibiting individuals who are under guardianship for reasons of mental illness from being able to vote has been on the ballot twice before in Maine. The first time was in 1997 when voters decided on question 5. The amendment was defeated, being approved by 41.87% of voters and defeated by 58.13% of voters. The second time a measure to amend Article 2, Section 1 appeared on the ballot was in 2000 and was also called Question 5, but was also defeated by voters by 60.25% to 39.75%. How did this measure get on the ballot? The amendment, LD 1653, was sponsored by Senator Craig Hickman, Democrat, for the state legislature to place a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Maine. A 2/3 majority, 66.67%, vote is required from each chamber during one legislative session. On June 20th, the Maine State Senate and the Maine House of Representatives voted to engross the amendment. On July 25th, the House and the Senate each voted by a 2/3 supermajority to approve the amendment for the ballot. Like, someone wants this to get through. 3 times in like 2 decades. Um, like they really want it to go through. The Maine Monitor, I'm not going to read all of this. I will leave this up to individuals to read for themselves. It's by the Maine Monitor, by Samantha Hogan specifically, published on October 8th. Maine's constitution says people in guardianships with mental illness cannot vote. Voters can change that in November. Another article. Wait, let me see. Does this actually? Yes, it does. So I will read this Maine Public. I didn't actually read it for question 7. I read it for 5 and for 6. 7, I forgot about it and I skipped over it. So know that, and you can go back and read that for yourself. So this comes from Maine Public, as I've said a couple times now. Questions about November's ballot measures. The Political Pulse crew has some answers. Steve Missler, Kevin Miller. Getting to where I need to be. Question 8 restores voting rights to people under guardianship for mental illness. Question 8 asks Maine voters, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to remove a provision prohibiting a person under guardianship for reasons of mental illness from voting for governors, senators, and representatives, which the United States District Court for the District of Maine found violates the United States Constitution and federal law? Article 2 of Maine Constitution establishes the qualifications for voting in state and local elections, including residency and being at least 18 years old. It also includes a prohibition on people under guardianship for reasons of mental illness. Question 8 seeks to remove that prohibition for the 3rd time. In 1997 and 2000, the legislature advanced constitutional amendments that would have removed the guardianship restriction, but voters defeated it in both times. The following year, voting rights advocates challenged the prohibition, arguing that it disenfranchises people with mental illnesses and assumes they're unable to make voting decisions. A U.S. District Court judge in 2001 ruled in the advocates' favor, saying that the prohibition violates the Due Process and Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. State lawmakers subsequently removed the restriction from its election code. However, it remains in the Constitution because amending the document requires a 2/3 vote from the House and Senate and an affirmative vote from Maine voters. 22 years after the judge's ruling, the legislature this year mustered the support to send the amendment to voters. It sounds like they did something in the past and now they're trying to ask for our forgiveness or our permission. And they desperately need it because they've tried to pass this in 97, 2000, and now in 2023. Something just ain't right. This is the Bangor Daily News. I'm not going to read this one either. I'll leave that up for you guys. So Bangor Daily News, it's by the Bangor Daily News editorial board. Question 8 might seem complicated, but a yes vote should be easy. And then that last article I have read before. I will read these last two. Spectrum News by Susan Cover. 2 Maine ballot questions seek compliance with federal law, U.S. Constitution. 2 questions on the November 7th ballot will ask voters to take outdated and illegal language out of the Maine Constitution. Question 7 proposes to remove a provision that requires those who circulate a citizen's initiative or people's veto to be a Maine resident and registered voter. Federal courts ruled that unconstitutional in 2020, citing First Amendment concerns. As a result, Maine Secretary of State Shanna Bellows said the state no longer tries to enforce the requirement. Similarly, Question 8 proposes to take language out of the Constitution that prohibits a person under guardianship for reasons of mental illness from voting, which violates the U.S. Constitution and federal law. The federal constitution trumps the Maine state constitution, Bellows said. Those provisions are automatically no longer enforced whether they are written down or not. She described both questions as an attempt at a constitutional cleanup. These two constitutional amendments will not change what happens in reality. It will make sure the language matches what we have in law, she said. It's important these two amendments pass. Lawmakers agreed, giving both the green light with the required two-thirds support, meaning Republicans and Democrats voted in favor of them. In testimony to lawmakers in April, John Brightagam, an attorney with legal services for the elderly, noted that in 2000, Maine voters rejected an attempt to remove the language regarding mental illness from the Constitution. A lawsuit followed, and the U.S. District Court Judge George Signal struck the language down, saying it violates the U.S. Constitution. Judge Signal ruled that the state may not deny the right to vote on the basis of an arbitrary term such as mental illness. Brightagam wrote. That ruling remains binding to this day. One dissenting voice on the issue came earlier this month from Matthew Gagnon, Chief Executive Officer of the Maine Policy Institute, a conservative think tank. In an opinion piece published October 4th in the Bangor Daily News, Gagnon said, while he understands the current language in the Constitution is overly broad, he thinks there should be some guardrails to prevent those who cannot reason through a voting decision from casting a ballot. Given this, I will vote no, but with the hope that in the next legislative session, a new proposal is put forth that actually changes this clause to both protect the state and Mainers with mental health issues, while also protecting voting rights and expanding them to people who deserve to be enfranchised, he wrote. In support of removing the language, Brightagam recounted the various other ways women, non-whites, convicted felons, and other poor have been denied the right to vote at various times in our history. He said it's important to remove the language from the state's founding document. This is not just about mental illness and not just about voting, he wrote. It is about the kind of society and community we want to be. I agree we should try towards the reality that we want to have, but if we're too idealistic and too utopian, those that want power and will use any means to get it will do so. I do like what Gagnon said. While he understands the current language in the Constitution is overly broad, he thinks there should be some guardrails to prevent those who cannot reason through a voting decision from casting a ballot. Given this, I will vote no, but with the hope that in the next legislative session, a new proposal is put forth that actually changes this clause to both protect the state and Mainers with mental health issues, while also protecting voting rights and expanding them to people who deserve to be enfranchised, he wrote. I agree with that. There are some people that cannot, if they cannot tie their shoes, if they have to have help getting bathed on a regular basis. I'm not talking about elderly people. So that was the argument I wasn't expecting or I hadn't prepared for previously. There are some elderly people that are fully cognizant that your body just doesn't allow them to work. My grandfather passed away at 96. He had full mental capacities until I believe I was pretty young, 16, and I had a lot going on. I believe he had full cognitive capabilities until like 6 months until he passed away. His body shut down at 94, 90, 94. It was shutting down. That's still incredible. He still was building chicken coops. He was still doing these things. He was a wood carpenter. He worked in a factory. He was still assembling and building in his mind. He was still paying attention to the news. He loved Emerald Lagasse. He loved cooking shows, specifically Emerald Lagasse. I bought an air fryer in his honor, an Emerald Lagasse air fryer in his honor. It is great. So I can understand the elderly. I guess in my mind, I'm thinking more people that are young adults and they're incapable of tying their own shoes. They have to be reminded to shower. They can't hold a job. So I understand where Gagnon's coming from, and I have that same sentiment that I'm going to vote no, but with the hopes that in the future we can clarify the clause and come to better understand and dictate, define what we want. So the last one I'm going to share is from NG Exchange. We've read the rest of this. We're going to finish up by reading question 8, which actually seems like the longest one of them all in NG Exchange. And starting with the text on the ballot. Do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to remove a provision prohibiting a person under guardianship for reasons of mental illness from voting for governor, senators, and representatives, which the United States District Court for the District of Maine found violates the U.S. Constitution and federal laws? Background from the League of Women Voters. This would amend the Maine Constitution so that individuals under a guardianship for reasons of mental illness will be able to vote in elections for governors, senators, and representatives. A federal court has already ruled that this restriction violates the U.S. Constitution and federal law. A yes vote means you want to amend the Maine Constitution to get rid of the restriction on voting for people under guardianship for mental illness, which will bring Maine's Constitution into agreement with federal law. A no vote means you don't want to amend the Maine Constitution to allow people under guardianship for mental illness to vote for governor, senators, and representatives. Context from the Bangor Daily News. A yes vote permits Mainers under guardianship for mental illness to vote. A no vote continues a prohibition on voting that has not been enforced since a 2001 court ruling found it unconstitutional, making this largely a housekeeping measure. Maine has been wrestling with this issue for decades. Originally, the state constitution barred paupers and persons under guardianship from voting. In 1965, it was amended to just apply to those under guardianship for mental illness. In 1997 and 2000, Maine voters were asked to strike that provision. Each time they refused. Finally, a judge effectively did it for them by ruling that the prohibition violated the 14th Amendment and singled out for no legitimate basis people with psychiatrically based diagnosis. This year, lawmakers sent another bid to change the law to voters, from the Bangor Daily News Guide to the Constitutional Amendments on Maine Ballot. Excuse me, did I just read that correctly? In 97 and 2000, Maine voters were asked to strike that provision. Each time they refused. Finally, a Maine judge effectively did it for them by ruling that the prohibition violated the 14th Amendment and singled out for no legitimate basis people with psychiatrically based diagnoses. So they were like, hey, here's this thing. No, in 97. Again, 3 years later in 2000, hey, here's this thing. They said no. And then those people that kept hearing no then went to a judge and got the judge to say yes for them. It's what? The proposed law and the legislation action LD 1653 resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Maine to allow persons under guardianship for mental illness to be electors and to protect all electors from harassment and intimidation. I am under agreement that there needs to be some cleanup of the language. Mental illness is very broad. However, there are people with legitimate mental illnesses that should not be consulted when we as a state vote on things. I don't want people that aren't of sound mind to start giving input and swaying those of us that are of sound mind. And oftentimes those of us with sound mind are so busy working our asses off that we don't even have time to vote, that we forget it's voting season, that we don't study the votes, we don't look into it like we should. So I'm going to vote no on this one. And again, this is I'm not preaching to anyone. I am not telling anyone how they should or should not vote. That is not what this is about. This is about bringing up articles that you can look into yourself. You can listen to this as if it's a podcast on your way home from work, on your way to work. You can get more informed in those in-between moments, and you can find out for yourself and then you can do the research from where I've given you some room. So I hope that this has earned your subscription. It's been hard work, but it's not been lousy. I've been enjoying it. It's been fun. I've enjoyed it. It has been grueling, but I think it's important. I think the tree just fell. So, on that note, I'm going to go look at the yard and see the tree coming down. Um, I think from the videos, you can tell the sun setting. Two of these videos I'm not going to record in the same day. I'm going to record them tomorrow. There's just so much to get into with the research and with the recording. Each of these videos is about 20 to 30 minutes long. And that physically means that I have to take that time to do this. But I enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed it. So leave a comment down below with something that you agreed with something you disagreed with, a part that you liked, a quote that you liked from something that I read. Just interact. It really helps the algorithm. Go ahead and like, subscribe, comment, share, all that good stuff. And until the next video, I hope that you have a great day.